Hi.
Thank you all for coming, and I want to give a huge thank you to John Paul and the State Board of Education for working with us and putting this together, and for this incredible turnout, all of you coming and caring about this issue. And then Brian for a great presentation. You're going to hear some of those same themes as I go through a little bit of the DC local context on this issue. So my name is Scott Goldstein. Again, I started EmpowerEd 2 years ago. I was teaching in DC for 10 years, and I started EmpowerEd driven by this issue, right? Driven by seeing so many great colleagues who have been in teaching for whether it's 5 years or 25 years, starting to leave. And schools like mine that had 30–40% turnover year to year. And what I knew was that students, because I heard this from them, internalized that, right? As students believed it was about them. That somehow teachers were leaving because they didn't want to teach them as students, right? And that was heartbreaking to me, and that's why I do this work every day, because I feel like if we can solve the adult problems that lead to turnover, things you just heard about, we can better serve our students, right? And so that's really the motivation for being here, is how do we keep these great teachers in schools to serve their students? And so it's really great to have a diverse group of stakeholders talking about this. This is the work that EmpowerEd is doing. There's two key levers for us in trying to retain great teachers in our highest need schools. The first you heard about a little bit from Ryan, which is creating sustainable work environments and a collaborative team culture. And the second is, do we have authentic opportunities for teacher voice and for teacher leadership, both at the school and then also at the district level? And authentic meaning they're driven by teachers, not teachers essentially as implementers, but teachers as the idea engines behind how schools grow and develop. So research, there's been a lot of research that indicates, as Ryan mentioned, both of these are tied not only to retention, but to higher student outcomes. And so a little bit about the basic context in DC. 25% is our overall turnover rate from the State Board of Education report across both sectors. National average between 16 and 19% in several studies. On our, what we used to call the 40-40 schools, our 40 lowest performing schools, the rate is closer to 33% on a year-to-year basis. To me, the number that really strikes me is looking at our 3-year and our 5-year turnover, right? And we'll mention this a little bit more when we talk about teacher effectiveness. We're looking at the 5-year term. 70% of our teachers are leaving within 5 years, and that's leaving the district, right? And the urban district average is 58%. So this is a problem, right, in other places, right? This is not unique to DC to have high turnover, but we're above the national average, and there are definitive strategies and ways we can address that for our students. We're also talking about principal turnover today, because the two are really linked. 21% of DCPS schools begin a school year with a new principal. That's 24% in the charter sector. This is not different from the national average. This is pretty on par from what we see in other urban districts. But again, the striking number here is looking at that long-term trend. So 2/3 of DCPS schools, and we don't, I believe, have this the same number for the charter sector, but DCPS schools have had 2 to 3 principals in the 5-year term. So the important part here is, how does a principal implement a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, a school turnaround vision when you have 2 to 3 leaders in a school over a 5-year period, right? So there are a lot of causes of this, and we'll talk about solutions at your tables. The one thing I want to focus on is, how do we make sure that leadership is sustainable at the schools so that the teaching cohort can be sustainable as well? We also really want to focus your attention tonight specifically on the issue of educators of color. So we know from a lot of research, right, and our daily experience in schools, how important it is, not just to students of color, but to all students, that we have a diverse educator workforce. So this is looking at, you can see teacher demographics. This is both sectors in all DC schools, 2007, 2008, and then we're looking at 2011, 2012. This is from school staffing surveys, so these are estimated from those surveys. And what you see, if you're looking at just that red slice of black teachers in DC, you're dropping from 65% to 48% over this 4-year period, right? And this is a key period, right, in the history of DC education. We're seeing a huge drop over that time period in black teachers in the system, and that's incredibly important. Obviously, we have a huge black student population in DC. The number is pretty much stabilized since then in DCPS. We don't have those numbers for the charter sector. What strikes me most about this, and this is from the Albert Shanker Institute, which does a teacher diversity report at the national level, and they've done that several times. This is from the most recent one, looking back a decade. And what you see is that Washington, D.C. had the greatest drop among black teachers and the greatest increase among white teachers of any of the cities that they mentioned. Obviously, demographics play a part in this, but there's two interesting places to think about in context here. New Orleans and Cleveland, which has similar black populations citywide, and also in their teacher workforce. New Orleans, which is similar, closer to where we are in terms of the breakup between public and charter. Obviously, their system transitioned a lot after Katrina, right? In New Orleans, they also experienced a huge drop of black teachers in that time period. But Cleveland is really interesting, because what you see in Cleveland, similar black population to DC, is in Cleveland, actually, their public schools did pretty well at stabilizing the black teaching force. The charter sector had a huge drop of black teachers and a huge increase in white teachers. And so it's another thing to think about as we're considering, are our solutions different by sector? It was great to hear Ryan talk about the pipelines and the residency programs. We know that there's a difference in the long term and how long teachers are staying based on which pipelines they're coming in from. And that's a thing that we haven't had a lot of research on, but what we do have shows that it's something we should pay more attention to. This is DCPS, which is now reporting the numbers themselves, which is great. Transparency, and again, same trend. We're basically where we are in 2011, 2012, in the most recent year. One thing I want to point out, 20% of our students are Latinx, right, in DC. Only 7% of our teachers. We are closer to parity between our student population and our teaching population. Black teachers and our black student population. 60% of our students are black, 50% of our teachers. That's pretty similar with principals, but we do not have that kind of parity with Latino or Latina principals and teachers. So just a little bit about continuing on the teachers of color. Bellwether Education pulled from DCPS exit survey data reasons why teachers are leaving. So like Ryan said, but this is now specific to DC. And what we saw is specifically teachers of color were likely to cite more leadership opportunities as the key thing that would have retained them in our schools. So this is really interesting because we know from other research that there is experience. This isn't specific to DC, but there's been bias in leadership opportunities and career ladders. And so that's an interesting thing to think about. Are we being intentional about making sure that diverse leaders and educators can take advantage of career ladders? That's a key reason that they're leaving, and something we can certainly address. Another key thing to think about is who are we losing? One way, it's a limited measure, right, of looking at that is looking at our impact teacher evaluation. If we look at it year to year, the good news is this. We look at effective teachers and highly effective teachers. We're retaining about, from the State Board of Education report, about 87% of effective and highly effective teachers year to year. That's the promising part. Over the 3 and 5 year term, right, we're losing a lot of those effective and highly effective teachers. So this is another thing for you guys to be thinking about at your tables. The majority, I think that's quick math, 54%, 53% of our teachers that we've lost in 5 years have been effective or highly effective. Now it's important to consider more teachers get rated effective and highly effective than ineffective. But still, our retention challenge with effective teachers is in that 3 and 5 year time frame. So if you look at that over the course of time, that's 1,700 teachers in 5 years that we've lost that we've said are effective or are highly effective. We know there's a correlation with at-risk students. The higher the percentage of at-risk students, the higher the turnover rate in that school. But I feel really passionately about this point. We know both anecdotally and from this research that is not, when teachers say the reasons they're leaving, is not about the students they're serving. Right? Teachers feel really passionate about serving the student population. The reason they're leaving is sometimes the policies for higher at-risk schools are different from the policies we utilize in lower at-risk schools. And so they cite things like dissatisfaction with leadership at those schools more often than they cite them in other schools. And part of that, to be fair to principals, right, is principals deal with a different set of stressors and policies at those higher at-risk percentage schools. So that's an area to think about. Overall picture, Ryan covered this well. The data is pretty similar nationally and here in DC. We know the overall picture is, people say relocation as the #1 reason, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot. #2 is dissatisfaction with school leadership, and then similar things around support, behavioral support, and lack of recognition. But if we look specifically at high performers, I think they're using impact again here, more scheduling flexibility and leadership opportunities are what high performers said would have retained them. And what they mean specifically by that, this is interesting because there was just a story about Northern Virginia schools doing more experimentation with this, is part-time and flexible scheduling options. Right? I can attest to this as a new parent, relatively new parent, right? We're losing a lot of the teachers once they start a family, and there are charter schools who are doing great things and having more part-time and flexible scheduling options. We should look at that as a city and how we retain people once they start families and stay rooted in the district for the long term. And that's specifically what they said in the survey data. Quickly on solutions, this is what you're going to spend your next hour on. Teacher Leadership Innovation Program in DCPS, allowing teachers to take release time from the classroom to work on policies that they care about, to take on instructional roles. We want to expand those opportunities for teachers. We've seen DCPS Design Lab, for example, opportunities for teachers and principals, other people at schools to work together to fundamentally change something about their school and do it in a different and innovative way. That's the kind of leadership opportunity that can retain our teachers. And then an expanded view of social emotional work, the need to do that with teachers and adults as well as doing it with our students. And more teacher-led professional development. We see dissatisfaction with professional development, use of teachers' time. And so allowing teachers to lead more, asset mapping your schools, make sure you're using your teachers' assets to spread to the rest of the staff is a key factor. So I'm going to close, and I just want to focus on what I think is the most important why, which is our students. So I got this note recently from a teacher at a DC charter school, and a teacher at their school was looking for another job. School administrators found that out, and the teacher was fired. He asked to come back and say goodbye to his students, and wasn't allowed to do that. And when the students found out about that, they wrote these notes to their teacher, who they had known for a long time. And they were just heartbreaking to read for me, and I share with their permission. One said, "I hope the next school is better." These are elementary school students, children, right? Said, "I'm kind of mad at you. I hope I go to the school where you are at." And so this is what I mean by students internalize these messages, right? They start to feel like it's about them. And if we want to have a student-centered analysis of moving the needle on turnover, we should think about not just have they been rated effective, or are they staying within the system, right? Because what our students care about is how is that teacher affecting them as a whole person, right? It's not just what they do in instruction, or it's not just what they do with impact, or it's not just what they do with extracurriculars, it's the whole thing. It's how they impact them as a person, how they serve as a mentor to them. And so how do we keep people in their school, working for their students and their families, right? And so considering turnover at the school level is really important. And I just wanted to close by hearing, we had a summit a month ago, and we had a student speak on this issue, a former student of mine at Roosevelt, and he spoke briefly about the importance of teacher turnover and how it affects him and how it affects others as students. So I wanted to leave with a student before we break up into our small groups.
We must weigh carefully the power
Can we hear?
of investing in the adults from whom we expect so much. For students, these amazing, inspiring teachers are the difference between achievement and an achievement gap. Students need these relationships to succeed in school. When teachers are being paid on average 30% less than other college graduates and are leaving schools or the teaching profession, it is the students who are affected the most, and students of color, many of whom already suffer from significant disruption in their personal lives, feel the effects even more. High turnover rates are even higher in already struggling schools serving low-income neighborhoods where the students need the utmost love and support. If we want love for our students, and I believe we want love for our students, we must ensure we are showing the same love to excellent teachers. We must provide teachers the opportunity to decompress, especially teachers of color, with a focus of males of color who oftentimes play multiple vital roles in the schools. We must ensure they're being provided adequate support by their administration. We must give them critical feedback and coaching that won't jeopardize their jobs if they need support around certain areas. We must give them the opportunity to grow in their practice and grow with their students. They should be given more time to develop extracurricular activities with students to further student success in and out of the classroom. Teachers are at the core of student success, and we must retain excellent teachers if we are to achieve excellent results for children, both in school and in life. Thank you.